In this lesson, we will look at the three categories of services that you can get with a cloud provider, specifically Microsoft Azure. The first service category you should be familiar with is IaaS, which stands for Infrastructure as a Service. So with a cloud provider, you can rent the hardware and then you take care of everything else from the operating system on up. You install and manage an operating system and all the applications and dependencies. The resource you should most closely associate with IaaS is a virtual machine. The only thing that you don't control when you're using a virtual machine is the hardware that is abstracted away from the operating system and then everything else that lives on top of the operating system. Another category of services that you can subscribe to is PaaS, and this is Platform as a Service. And this is where you, the customer, provide the apps and data, and then you're renting everything else. So the two resources that I want you to lock into your mind or associate with PaaS are databases and web apps. So in the example of PaaS, do you control or manage SQL? No. All you do is just put the data in SQL and then you manage the data that is there. You might purge it, you might archive it, and so on. Same thing with web apps. You just worry about the application, you update the code of the application, but you don't have to manage the platform that is making that web application available to the rest of the world. The third service category you should be familiar with is SaaS, and that stands for Software as a Service. This is where you are simply subscribing to software that is centrally managed by the provider of that software. Now, in the Microsoft world, you can think of things like Office 365 and Dynamics CRM, where you just license the software and then you get to use the software. You still have management over the emails that maybe Outlook has, but you don't manage updates of Outlook. Microsoft does. You don't manage the hardware that Outlook resides on. Microsoft does. And this same concept extends to other software as a service, something like Salesforce, where they just provide the service and all you need is a web browser and then you just use the software that they manage, they store, and they update. On this next slide is a graphic that really powerfully reinforces these concepts that I've introduced here. And that is this one right here, and I'll make this available as a handout associated with the course. But you can see going from left to right the differences between what you manage and control when you have on-premises computing environments versus infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And remember that you'll never just do, well, I won't say never, but it's unlikely that you'll do either one or the other. You might have in your deployment a virtual machine, which would be IaaS. You might also have a SQL database or maybe a data lake implementation, and you would use platform as a service. And then you might also be a subscriber to Office 365, in which case you'd be using software as a service. So here is the big takeaway. As you move left to right, your management overhead decreases. So this arrow points to the left, just showing you that you do the least amount of management when you are implementing software as a service or taking advantage of software as a service. A little more management if you are using platform as a service. When you're using a virtual machine and infrastructure as a service, a little more overhead, and then on premises, you own and manage everything. So 3 categories of cloud services for you to put in your noodle, and that just about wraps things up in our Cloud Concepts chapter. Now for a quick summary, and then a few sample questions.